All right, welcome. Hello, everyone. My name is Mia. I'm a member of the Robbinsdale for Racial Justice group, and I'm a resident in Ward 3 near Lee Park. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I especially want to thank Isaac Jahraus, our Robbinsdale City Council Ward 2 candidate, for speaking with us today. The intention of this meeting is to allow for a space to talk about racial justice and equity issues as they pertain to our elected officials ahead of our primary election coming up on August 11th. Several members of the Robbinsdale for Racial Justice group have come up with a series of questions, and I've presented these questions to Isaac a couple of days ago, and we're here to listen and become better informed voters. And for those of us who are white members of the community, we are here to be better allies to our neighbors who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. With that said, we will allow space for follow-up questions from the audience at the end, and white people will defer and listen to BIPOC members when they have something to say. This meeting is recorded, as you should be able to see a recording icon on your screen, and you'll notice that audience microphones are off for the first part of our meeting, and then you'll be invited to ask follow-up questions via the chat later on. And I will open your microphone if you prefer. The meeting structure will be as follows. In a moment, Mr. Jahraus will have 5 minutes for an introduction and any opening statements. I will spend 30 minutes asking the questions that we voted on, and then we'll take questions from you in the chat or again over the microphone for about 15 minutes. Finally, Isaac will have 2 minutes for any closing statements where we will then wrap up the meeting. Okay, so Isaac, thank you so much for being here. Would you now please introduce yourself and give us your opening statement?
Of course, thank you for having me. Hi everybody, I'm Isaac Jahraus. My pronouns are he, him, his. I was born in Texas, but I've been in Minnesota for the remainder of my life. I'm a Robbinsdale resident for the last 2 years. And a big thing, I first want to just talk about my 3-point plan and then go into my experience. So a 3-point plan, it's very simple. Represent, educate, and advocate. Now let's expand on those 3 points. Represent. I want to make connections throughout the entire community of Robbinsdale while moving forward as one. But I know that the conversations have to happen. You have to know your neighbors. You got to be able to knock on doors and get a little uncomfortable, get out of that bubble. And that's what I really advocate for everybody to do and represent for themselves within their own neighborhood and community. Secondly, educate. I want to refocus the entire community conversation onto equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I would like to do this through implementing community discussion, bringing in community leaders for workshop panels, and using open educational resources or just resources that don't cost money. And advocate. This is probably one of the biggest ones because I want to advocate and reform policies, and I want those policies to center around the idea of inclusive politics. I want everybody to have a seat at the table, especially people that have not been heard or who are not represented. And I just want, because I'm here in this position because in this city council in Robbinsdale, I don't have anyone there that looks like me. And I want that to, other, Black, Indigenous, and people of color to see that and to engage them to act for action. And lastly, so I just want to build on the foundation that they've already set before me and continue to learn first and foremost, and to listen and build diverse relationships. Now, I want to talk about my experience because, I've been here for 2 years and a lot of people ask, like, who is this guy? So my experience is as follows. So I was a community college student, and there I got involved in student government, the student senate. And I was at Normandale Community College, which is actually also 14,000 people, which is pretty close to the Robbinsdale population. So we got to engage in that community and see what the students wanted at Normandale, and then bring that to the certain silos that we needed to, whether it was, like student leadership or the principal or student affairs. Then from there, we were part of an organization called Lead MN. And so our school was a part of a state organization from all community and technical colleges that were housed under the Minnesota State umbrella. It's like Normandale, North Hennepin. Let's see, the state college would be Mankato State University if you go down south. But they cover from Alexandria to Pipestone, all the way to Red Wing and everything in between. And so that Normandale was a part of a region. And this is kind of important. So like we had the school, and then the school was a part of a region. And we talked to our region, and we realized that the region and different areas, they didn't have the same problems as we did. So we learned from each other, but we had to have that conversation first. But most importantly, we had to be brought together. And then from that region, we would go on to the big state conferences. And that would be everybody in the whole entire state of Minnesota there. And that's where we would pass our platform document, or the thing that would allow us to advocate on different issues like DACA, homelessness and food insecurities, to simplifying the FAFSA form that you have to fill out for college, because that's a whole nother story. But if you fill out one question wrong, there goes your money for school. And I just really want to bring that template of learning to Robbinsdale. And you could start with, your neighbors, and then move on to your street, and then hopefully to your ward, and then your whole entire city. I think that covers everything for my opening statement. So Mia, we can move on into the next question.
Yes, thank you so much. So for the next part of our meeting, as I said, we'll be asking you a series of questions that the group has submitted and organized in advance. Again, for transparency's sake, these questions were presented to Mr. Jahraus a few days ago. And by the way, any other candidate that's also meeting with this group in other Zoom calls, these same questions will be asked in the same order. So for now, I'll refrain from asking any follow-up questions at this time. But Isaac, if you see any activity in the chat box, which is open to the group, if you want to address that in real time, please feel free. And then also, if it's okay, just for the sake of, getting through as many questions as possible, for any answers that exceed, we'll say maybe like 2 or 3 minutes, I may just kindly say 15 seconds and ask you to summarize and wrap up so we can, like I said, get to as many questions as possible today. Okay, so let's jump in with our first question then. What are some of the racial inequities that you identify in Robbinsdale, and what are the metrics you would use to measure our progress in those areas?
Yes. So with me being in Robbinsdale for the last 2 years, I have to lean on me being Black in Golden Valley and Plymouth and Medicine Lake, where I grew up. And so people that look different from one another, there's usually some type of barrier there already because we look different. And then 2, if that barrier is then misconstrued by media, social media, or maybe a racist opinion, that can be harder to penetrate those conversations of inequities. So 1, places of town that get a bad rap. Immediately that comes to mind because I was in conversations, people were like, oh, well, you live in Robbinsdale, isn't that close to North Minneapolis? And I'm just like, yeah, it is. And North Minneapolis is a beautiful place, but I drive through North Minneapolis, and I go through North Minneapolis, and my friends live in North Minneapolis, so I don't have that stigma. But really addressing those types of questions, I feel would be very, very important through community conversation, because there are neighbors, and just having those conversations of, hey, we're people, we need to come together and just talk. And then what are the metrics I would use to measure our progress in those areas? I like numbers. I really do like numbers. I would use the census data, and I was actually looking over like the proposed budget, and the cost expenditures for the City of Robbinsdale, specifically like Parks and Rec, or like the police budget, and what does that look like for community? So 1, I would want the census to really back up the people that live here, and so that we could get additional resources to really just kind of even the playing field so that everyone doesn't have a racial bias just because of the area that you live in.
Great, thank you. That's a good reminder. I'm not sure if the deadline has passed. My husband, Nick, and we filled out the census, but it's a good reminder for the group and anyone listening to do the same. Okay, next question. What strategies will you use to increase racial equity in Robbinsdale if you're elected?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we all got to become a student again, and we have to learn. Because I'm not the only resource for myself. I have to reach out to different organizations. I have to write emails. But what would I use? I would use the existing structures that I already know, that I have seen be beneficial. And what that is all the relationships I had in Lead MN. And so I had relationships with people from all over the entire state. And racial inequity in Robbinsdale is not the same in International Falls or Alexandria. But what the core problem is that change factor. And I think we need to identify the people that want to be agents of change, and then we go out with resources and invite people into those resource meetings, talks, and we all have to learn. And we all have to learn, one, what equity is, what inclusion is, what diversity is. And I think that would be a great starting point for everyone. Or even one of my ideas, if elected, is I would do like a social media campaign. Like for one, I would collect hashtags from people and ask them, what is equity to you? What is inclusion to you? What is diversity to you? Because if you don't know what other people are thinking about, I don't really think you can truly have that conversation. So you have to see where everyone else is at, because I'm the type of person where I'm going to meet you where you're at. And then we can both learn from that moment and build together. Because a rising tide raises all boats. So if we do that with education, I think that will be the right way.
Right. Well, my next question leads nicely into that, since you're talking a lot about learning. So have you done any personal work or learning on topics of racism? And if so, of what nature?
Yeah, so you're gonna hear me say Lead MN a lot, because I was with that organization for 5 years. I was a part of a student diversity task force that was created to really focus on inclusion and equity, everything that has to do with higher education. And we involved people from Minnesota State, like Dr. Clyde Wilson Pickett. He's the chief diversity officer. I was actually involved in his hiring process and got to pick his brain before he was then voted into that position. So I really got to know the ins and outs of someone that has that, has the master's degree, has all the tools in their tool belt, and I got to pick and choose what I wanted to learn for the students, because I know we couldn't take everything, but we had to choose one item by one item. One thing that we did, actually, you know what, I'm going to save that one for our next question, but we did help shape the Minnesota State sexual assault policy that was being rolled out. And we said pump the brakes, because not all of the community members were involved in that decision. And we thought that they put it out a little bit too fast. So we advocated to slow down, involve students, because this policy is going to affect students, because the rub there was that they wanted to do like the focus groups and the community outreach when students were on break and not at school. I viewed that as a huge problem and a barrier, access barrier.
Mm.
So let's
Yes.
see here. That was question 3.
Yes. So my next question, we're going to shift talking about the Robbinsdale Police Department next. So how would you hold the Robbinsdale Police Department accountable if there were inappropriate or harmful actions?
Yeah, we got to have a police review board that has community members on it. Other industries have it, and it's, when I was like knocking on doors, especially on Beard, his name was James, and he was a lawyer, and actually his wife just had a baby. And we were just talking about like a review board, and how like I was a nonprofit and I was currently employed at C.H. Robinson. Like we had review boards for almost everything. But it seems to be that if you look at it in the headlines, or if you just do a Google search, that a lot of police accountability is handled within. And I don't really like that. I think a police review board should probably encompass, a couple different community members from each ward. maybe a business owner, and have those people on that board be a diverse cross section of what Robbinsdale really is, and then having those people hold accountable the police force that is there to protect and serve us, the people, the community members. That would be one action. And also get the people involved with the Robbinsdale police force. Like go say hi to a cop, go talk to them. You have to show up and have that conversation. And let's see. Now, inappropriate or harmful actions. Yeah, so
Yes.
The police review board.
Excellent, thank you. So my next question, what policy changes have you contributed to in support of racial justice and equity?
Yeah, so I was kind of alluding that to a little earlier. So the Minnesota State Sexual, I think it's the 1B1 policy. That's what that's what was a big spearhead for us, because it not only affected community colleges, but the state and tribal colleges as well. So the organization, when I was a part of it, had 180,000 students just in the community colleges. And some of those students did live on campus. And a huge deal was, well, how do you have a policy for people that are commuting into school and some who are physically located at that school? And one issue that was actually really close to me was in a sexual assault policy. Sometimes the victim would not be able to see what was going on the other side. They wouldn't be able to see if there was any action taken, negative or positive. There was no transparency, and we advocated as an association to have transparency going both ways.
Excellent, thank you. My next question, what would be your first action as City Council member to ensure Robbinsdale is starting down the path of working towards racial equity among our residents, businesses, and schools?
So the charter. The charter is the thing that gives the City Council and Mayor the power to act on certain policies, laws, and everything else. I would amend the charter. I would put in provisions that give City Council and the Mayor the power to act and advocate, and most importantly, allocate resources for racial equity. With that, because I think it's a very basic thing that should be at the core of an institution or a group, or I don't know, the Robbinsdale City Council. And I would add an amendment, hopefully, to give them power to advocate and allocate resources for racial equity. And this is also where we can use, and we're going to really have to use, open educational resources, because I think that there's going to have to be budget cuts with COVID-19. I mean, people are like, I don't think I really have to speak about that. People are losing their jobs. The money's not flowing how it used to. And we're really going to have to lean on, the stuff that's already out there that we can really capitalize on and move us forward as one.
Right, exactly. My next question, how would you use the Robbinsdale Human Rights Commission as a resource?
Yes. So one, it is my view that all the commissions are advisory groups. And one thing that I would like to change, and it is a little opposite of like budget cuts, but I would like to empower them financially, because I know that you can volunteer, and that's kind of the most powerful grassroots approach. But when you can give resources to those people and actually empower them in that way, I feel like I'm not diminishing the work of the commission at all, but I feel like if they had resources behind them to really do the mission and what their core beliefs, because I actually believe they have a meeting tonight in 10 minutes. Yeah, I would want to allocate them money, so then that resource can then build itself up every single year. Because without the resources, in my experience, I don't think you can get better. You can get better through conversation, but if you have the resources behind you, just imagine what could happen.
Great. And yes, you're absolutely right. They're meeting in about 10 minutes or so. I got a couple of messages from people in this group who may attend that meeting in person and come and watch our video later.
Yeah.
Okay, so my next question, coming back to the RPD. This is a more broad question, but what changes do you envision for the RPD?
Yeah. So I was looking at like the budget and numbers, and like the big conversation right now, you know, is what you hear is, you know, defund and abolish the police. And I completely understand those concepts. What I would like to see is a budget cut. Let the Robbinsdale police force keep doing what they're doing, but I don't like, this is hypothetical, but cut their budget in half and see if they can still do what they do, and then give that money to other areas. Because like on the, oh man, if I could bring up just like the pie chart, and when you see like just like on any pie chart, if you go like just search it, the policing and the actual police are always taking up a majority of that pie chart. And I like numbers. Numbers don't lie. I'm not gonna look for that. That's gonna be distracting. But I would like to see what they could do on a less budget, because as treasurer of that organization of Lead MN, I know how to allocate budgets in a way that makes sense, and I've been a part of that process before. Yeah.
Excellent. I know the pie chart that you're talking about too. Somewhere in the Facebook conversations of this group, that image was brought up in earlier conversations. So, all right. So my next question: do you have contacts or community partnerships in Robbinsdale or in other local communities that you would use as a resource to advance racial equity?
Yes. This would be over at the state capitol. So I actually, with Lead MN, we advocated at the state capitol and actually in Washington, D.C. The people that I worked with, because they supported our education agenda, would be Keith Ellison, Ilhan Omar, Attorney General Keith Ellison, Senator Ilhan Omar, Representative Bud Nordness, and Senator Fishbach. These people were a part of committees that heard us advocating for students, and they were very open to hearing us out, and getting an actual like Senate file or a House bill on the floor and getting it voted on. And I think that if we could do that with Robbinsdale, and then people could actually see their work getting voted on at the state capitol, there's a very, very powerful thing that can activate other agents of change in the area, especially here in the community of Robbinsdale. So I would want to reach out to all of our senators and representatives, both sides of the aisle, and say, hey, this is what we're about. Can you support us? And one thing that I would say and like to remind everybody is that all the state senators and representatives, they work for us. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people sometimes forget, is that, oh, well, they're a senator and they're on this, island of untouchable. No, you just go up to the state capitol and set a meeting, and then you got to wait to talk to them to get some FaceTime. It's really easy. And that's one thing that I would advocate for, is people to get involved with, one, your local city council people, then your state senator, and federal level as well.
Excellent, thank you. Next question: what is your number one priority or goal as city council member?
Yeah, have a grassroots approach to getting to know the community. And I've already been doing that. And I would then challenge the elected officials. If elected, I would challenge my colleagues and councilwomen and councilmen to like, let's go out and talk to the community. Let's see what they're about. Just by walking around, I know in the north section of Ward 2, I think that's Lilac Drive, there's a lot of apartments over there. And just the buzz over there was that they're wanting to build another apartment building. And just the conversation I was having is, some are for, some are against. And just really getting to know what the community's actually saying about stuff would be my priority and goal. Because you can be in city council and you can, you know, vote and amend and approve and everything else. But if you're not tied into the community and having those conversations and taking the time for like those one-on-ones, I really don't think the work would be worth it. I think it would be more fruitful to have those one-on-one interactions with the entire community, but we need everybody to engage in that process of grassroots. So that would be my number one goal, is get a grassroots approach and get everybody to City Hall. Like, I know you can't like have like gatherings over, I think, a 25, but I would try and get everybody engaged with the right resources and just make sure that they're in the know and give them good information to act appropriately.
Great, thank you. And yes, speaking of community, just for everyone who's joined us since the beginning, we just have maybe 4 more questions for Mr. Jahraus that were prepared ahead of time. So start thinking, you know, if you have any follow-up questions, you can start thinking on those and typing them in the chat, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. So Isaac, my next question: when should the City of Robbinsdale take the lead on social issues, and when should the city wait for action at the state or federal levels?
Yes. I know with being a part, so like when you're in, so Robert's rules, like the formality of like the rules and voting, that you have to have like quorum for some issues to happen. And I want to go back to the charter. I would want us to, yes, take the lead, but we also have to make sure that there are rules in place that Robbinsdale can act fast to these issues and not wait for a city council meeting to happen to then address those social issues. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 city council meetings ago, but there was a letter being signed about how they were, people who have signed the petition were kind of mad that it took that long for a city council to make a statement on the murder of George Floyd. And that's one thing that I know there's a lot of rules involved in that, but I would really want to just, you got to act fast on that. You really do. Yeah, you really do. And to take the lead on social issues. So I was all for a city mandate of masks. I did that on the CCX media forum, and now we have it coming Saturday. So, but I don't want everyone to be like, oh, well, it's coming from the state, so everyone's going to do it. No, let's let everybody know that Robbinsdale wants to keep our neighbor and community safe and mask up, you know. So I would love, you know, the City of Robbinsdale to have a mask mandate. I don't know if there is one yet, but I know that I personally am going to be writing to the current city council and mayor to make that happen.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next question: what is your vision for ensuring all Robbinsdale residents feel safe and free of harmful prejudices?
Yeah, so these last 3 questions were actually, these are some harder questions, because first, you really have to identify the people that are not safe, and you have to talk to those people who are not safe. And I know from door knocking in this position, in my last position, is that's a really hard conversation to get to actually happen. Because you are then asking people who have been harmed to relive that harm, but you almost have to frame it in a way that it's going to help. But on the other side, if it doesn't do anything, or if it doesn't go anywhere, like let's say if it was in a commission, you know, and that idea came up, but it never got relayed to the city council or mayor, that issue then essentially dies or gets killed in that commission and never gets light. And that's what I'm kind of scared of when we talk about feeling safe or free of harmful prejudices. Because right now, you can say systemic racism, and some people know what that means. Some people doesn't think that exists. And it's a big education piece right now. So you have to start on the building block. Like I said before, you have to meet the people where they are at, and then you have to build from there. So my vision is getting everybody at the table to have those really hard conversations, and we have to learn, but we also have to have policies that back up that learning.
Great, thank you. Uh, Earlier, you emphasized a bit on allocating city funds, so I have another question next here for you. If you're elected, will you find it important to allocate city funds toward racial equity programs?
Yes. Yes, I would. And I would like to see what, with COVID-19 happening and budget proposals, because I know they have a few proposed budgets for 2020. And I'm still combing through all those pages because there's a lot of pages there. But I don't know what line items that they would want to get rid of and then put and create a whole nother line item for racial equity programs. I know that we have the Human Rights Commission, and there's some other amazing groups like the one that we're in right now. And I want to, like I said before, I want to see these groups backed by monetary resources. I have seen it for my own two eyes. Like for Lead MN, I was able to secure a grant that made our backspace in our office. It was just like a garage, and we made it like stadium seating with streaming videos, and we could do resource trainings to the whole entire state because students couldn't drive, from International Falls to South St. Paul. So we secured grants, and that, I guess, on the city council, that would look like going into like the Chamber of Commerce, looking for grants from community partners, getting those resources so that you can build a program then to push out into Robbinsdale. Now, getting that money, I know is going to be hard. I know it's going to be very, very hard, especially with COVID-19 changing the way that money flows, but it still has to be at the front. I know that some companies, when George Floyd was murdered, they all of a sudden were pushing out their, racial equity statement, and this is our inclusion group here and inclusion group there. But it was very clear to me, like almost a trained eye, that wasn't your number one priority until something made it your number one priority. So I would like to see it organically just be up at the number one priority.
Great, thank you. Now, one more question here. So do you feel that the city parks and recreation serve all residents living in Robbinsdale?
So I looked at the numbers at this and they don't. It's actually very blatant. If you, I should just look it up. If everyone in this chat wants to reach back out to me about this issue, I can actually screenshot and show you the numbers of what type of people it affects and doesn't affect. And because personally, I didn't really see city parks and recreation serving all residents living in Robbinsdale. I didn't see that as an issue. That wasn't something that was on my radar, and that's me being honest. But then once I looked at the numbers and everything else, I was like, oh, well, numbers don't lie. And so I would want access. And one, I know, so I went to Wayzata High School and I lived in Plymouth, Minnesota. Right next to their city hall, they have a huge, beautiful, amphitheater that they do music in Plymouth for, because that's where my experience was there. And I'd like to see that in Robbinsdale. Why don't we have that here? Why don't we have that for our community members? I know watching the candidate forums, a couple of the mayors were talking about, a community center, and the price tag associated with that is very, very high, or using existing buildings. And I know that there was a lot of chatter on the Facebook groups about those conversations. So do I feel that they serve all residents? No. Will building parks and allocating resources help solve that problem? I don't actually know. I'm not gonna claim that I know the answer, but I know that access to parks is going to be a huge issue and a big barrier to people. Because if you want to go swimming in Robbinsdale, I think you have to go up to Weber Park. I think that's the closest. Yeah, I think that's the closest swimming area. Why couldn't we, have something like that? I don't know where it would go, but why can't we have it something closer, more immediate? Because I want to see stuff built in Robbinsdale for Robbinsdale community. I don't want to be going Like in a perfect world, I don't want to go to, you know, Crystal or New Hope when I can spend dollars in Robbinsdale.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so we've now covered all the questions that this group has prepared for you. And now we have time for those here in the meeting to ask any follow-up questions from what you've heard so far. So you can type your question in the chat. Please, everyone, feel welcome to open your camera if you wish to, and wave to me if you want to open your microphone too. So we've dedicated about 15 minutes of time for this space, and if we do run out of time, I'll ask that you hold your remaining questions, and then Mr. Jahraus can tell us in his closing statements the best way to reach out and continue these conversations outside of our meeting today. Okay, so let me take a look at the group here. Jennifer has a question. Jennifer asks, how do you see this group supporting your goals for equity and inclusion in the city? Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, I think this goes back to that grassroots approach. Everyone is here for the same reason. So like that's a common thread throughout. Now, how would it support my goals of equity and inclusion? We have to find or get a policy or a heading of somewhere where we want to go, and then be an agent of change and advocate for that policy. We have to get the word out, and yeah, that's how we would do it, like a grassroots approach. What I would do, like for the city council meetings or the Human Rights Commission meeting that's happening tonight, I would like on my own street to have like people identified to go into those meetings, get those resources, and then just have a little neighborhood meeting. Like we do Night to Unite, like one I think that's once a year. Why can't we do that like every other month, or like, like actually in accordance with like the city council meetings or the commission meetings? That would be one idea that I think that could support those equity and inclusion goals in the city.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? And also just feel free to, I believe you have the ability to unmute yourself as well if you just want to speak up.
Hey Isaac, quick question. You mentioned in terms of cutting the budget on the police department, and you gave an example, and it was a lot of people would consider it very extreme to say cut half the budget. Mm-hmm. Now on that vein, where do you see your efforts and time in those kind of extremes, like very strong vision efforts and trying to really push those initiatives versus kind of compromising and kind of chiseling away little by little, knowing that your community isn't on the same page as you right now?
So one thing in my experience that I've had, I'm gonna have to aim for the stars and then land on the moon. So I know so when I say cut half of the budget and they then just they do the same thing and see if they can operate on that same budget, that is a very strong and aggressive approach, and I'm very well aware of that. But I think what organically, hopefully, might happen is people hear that, hopefully get engaged, and then we have a conversation of what that actually looks like. So when that conversation starts, then we start to pick out the comment, like the cross section of those two ideas, and then naturally that will create a list of common things that we can move forward with. We can then take that list from all sides, think about that list, and then move forward, and then take it to like the next phase. So I say half, some people say full, we meet somewhere along that line, and then but we have to continue to move through that process. I know, I'll just go out on a limb saying I know that I don't believe that the budget will be cut in half, but I think that is an important starting point to at least acknowledge that, hey, there might be a problem here. where's the middle ground? What type of conversations do we need to have to involve people with this to get a solution that works for everybody?
I think the reason I asked that, because that is important. It's kind of a common grassroots approach to things, and I appreciate you kind of explaining that for people that maybe not understand that sometimes these quote unquote extreme statements aren't about actually meeting that statement, but rather bringing people to the table.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nick. Any other questions?
I do. Sorry, this is the first time I'm using Zoom on my phone, so.
We can see you and hear you, Lindsay.
Good. I'm glad. Okay. And Isaac, thank you for taking the time to meet with us. And I came in a little bit late, so please just tell me if you've already answered this and I missed it, because I can go back and watch the video. But I was just wondering if you have any thoughts about the Robbinsdale public school system and what equity and diversity and inclusion might look like within the school systems here.
Public school systems, equity, diversity, correct?
Yeah, I'm just interested, and I mean, I also have to admit that I'm not sure kind of what role the city council might play with the school systems, but it's just something I've been kind of thinking about recently, and just wondered if you had any thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I guess one thing I would want to know is so like I said, I like numbers. I would want to know how many Robbinsdale community folks and families are sending their kids to Robbinsdale schools. Mm-hmm. Find out what that number, find that number. I'm sure it's out there. I don't know it. Then you have to start separating the data of what type of people do you actually have. And that kind of almost leads back into my census stuff, because if you go, let's say if we gave a poll to schools and said, gender, race, and everything else, right? In that race category, I guarantee it's not going to capture everybody that is actual present in that school. Because I know, the box I check is black or African American, or it's not Hispanic. And I just know, you can watch the Olympics and just know that there's a lot of different races and everything out there, and that there's not a box for everybody. So I would actually want to start on gathering who's actually in the schools, how that information is getting collected. Because I'm a big advocate of information collecting, but doing it the right way. And you said public schools, equity, diversity. And knowing how the schools stack up against other schools. So I'm 31 years old. I have some friends with, kids starting to go into high school and middle school. And the one thing that everyone asks, hey, what school district are you in? Oh, you're in Robbinsdale? Oh, are those good schools or what? Because everyone is looking for a school to be good on paper, but they're not looking for the teachers or the programs that those schools are offering. They're and I want to change that kind of conversation to really benefit the students and the teachers. So I know that's a really roundabout way to talk about it, but I would really focus on collecting the data of who's actually in the school and appropriately acknowledging different religions, races, or however you want to collect that data, and having the option so people aren't just checking a not Hispanic or just black African box or white, any of those boxes that you see. I might not be giving it the right term, but is Lindsay, is that does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And sorry, my microphone died. So I don't know if you can.
I can hear you.
Can hear me? Okay. Yeah, no, it does. I think I just wanted to kind of get a sense of how you would even start thinking about approaching it, because I do think, it's one of the first things, you're right, that people say to me too is oh, you live in Robbinsdale, oh, how are the schools? I think it's, it's a big part of living here, and I don't know. Thanks. I just appreciate kind of, hearing where you would start looking at it.
Yeah, yeah, not a problem.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lindsay. Are there any other questions? Lindsay, if it's okay, I'll just go ahead and mute you. Oh, there you go. You got it. I don't see any other questions in the chat at the moment. Does anyone else have questions? Okay. So if there are no other questions, again, speak up if you think of one quickly here. But otherwise, if you come up with a question later, at this time, we'll start to bring our meeting to a close and ask Mr. Jahraus for a brief closing statement. And then, Isaac, can you also tell us the best way to find you online and the best way to continue these conversations if we do have more questions, later outside of this meeting?
Yes, so I'm actually gonna put the link, facebook.com vote Ike, in the chat right there for you guys. That's gonna bring you to like my political page on Facebook. And there you will find a way to contact me. My email's on there. It has a messenger. I have all the notifications coming through, so I've been in constant communication. I have yard signs if you guys want them. But that would be that. So if you guys actually want to see it on the video, that's facebook.com/vote Ike, I-K-E. I could actually put my email address in there. It is my name with my middle initial, so there is 2 J's. isaacjjarus@gmail.com. And those would be the main ways to contact me. And then would this also be my closing statement as well?
Yes, I was just going to say, if you have a closing statement, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah,
Please
for sure. Hey, everybody, I just want to thank you for having me be here, answering these questions, and just being able to think out loud really helps me grow as an individual. And I hope that through this, you got to know me just a little bit more. And this is really important. If elected or not elected, I'm still going to be here doing what I'm doing right now. I just want everybody to know that. Because that's the formality. Like, there's going to be votes on August 11th, and only 2 people move forward. And on that whole entire ballot, there's a lot of experience and a lot of unique experience. And what I noticed at that forum, Greenberg and Webb are currently on commissions. And so that's a different experience for me. But with that being said, I think the diversity of thought in Ward 2 specifically is amazing. And I'm just honored that I got to do this and be a part of this journey. And I would just ask you to engage with me on this journey so that we can just be better human beings. I think that's one of my main goals, is just be a better human being, because in return, that will create better sons, fathers, daughters, mothers, grandmothers, all around the whole entire community. Wear masks. I do believe Black Lives Matter. And I think that's all I got for you guys.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And you took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you all for attending. Be sure that you're registered to vote. Vote early by mail. Make sure your ballot is postmarked by August 11th. If you do vote in person, as Isaac said, please wear your mask, practice social distancing. And thank you again so much, Mr. Jahraus, for your time with us today. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Good night.